Welcome everyone, we are back. It's 3:30 Moscow time and we continue our conference. And I'd like to present our next speaker. It's Polina Kordik from St. Petersburg. Polina is a teacher and researcher in the area of second language acquisition. She's been teaching English in Sweden and Russia for more than 7 years and focusing on exam preparation. And Polina holds an MA in bilingualism and English from Stockholm University. And Polina will be talking about teaching and learning vocabulary for Cambridge Advanced English. So Polina, the floor is yours, over to you. So Polina, we can't hear you. So that's okay. Probably you can use headphones, so we can wait.
Is there a sound now? Yes. You can hear. Good. So, start.
Sorry, Polina, we can't hear you well.
Okay, how's the sound now? Increase the volume. I increased it to the maximum. And I see some classes and you say it's okay. Great, fantastic. Let's start then. Yeah, so thank you very much, Natalia, for your nice introduction. And actually, I prepared a slide with the introduction. I wasn't sure about it. So just a few words about my background. I graduated from Moscow State Linguistic University, and then I moved on to Sweden, and I got 2 MAs there. The one MA was in European languages, and the second one was in bilingualism and English. And after that, I moved completely to teaching, and I got some teaching qualifications like CELT-TKT and Cambridge International House course in advanced methodology. And I also like exams, so I took quite a lot of them. I passed CAE, CB, and IELTS, and now I'm in the process of doing my Delta. I'm currently doing the second module. It's quite a challenge, but it's really rewarding. And as for my teaching, I specialize on teaching at advanced levels, and during the last 4 years, I think, I'm preparing my students for CE exam, and I also quite recently started my public page on VK dedicated to advanced English, and you are very welcome to join. And this is vk.com/Lena English. Okay, so this is it, and let's move on to our topic. And I think this picture is quite familiar to you, and you can imagine a person who is almost finishing, this bar with B2 level, and this person would like to jump to C1 and C2, so to move on with their language skills and abilities. And there are several challenges here, and I'm going to introduce some of them, and I'm going to suggest some things about what we can do about them. So first of all, it's a so-called plateau effect, or intermediate plateau, it's sometimes called. The plateau, it's the place when you climb a mountain and there's this flat space before you reach actually the top. And this is what sometimes happens with many learners. The plateau effect consists of several aspects. And first of all, so some people lose their motivation. They don't know whether they need to proceed with their language learning or they can stop at this point. How should they do that, and so on. And they also need to spend more time on language with less visible progress. So when you proceed from, let's say, A1 to A2, it's a sort of set amount of time, and the progress is quite visible. But the higher you climb this several levels, the harder it gets to notice the progress. And what I also observe among my learners, my students, is the anxiety over using more authentic materials in real life. So when you are at B2, B2+, so you basically are fine with communicating on a daily basis. You may watch series with subtitles or sometimes without subtitles, but still a lot of people are anxious about reading authentic newspapers, let it be, I don't know, Guardian or the Telegraph or whatever, reading fiction, unabridged fiction, and listening to the radio and, excuse me, not to the podcasts that are made for learners. And this is actually the moment where you have to make promises to yourself that you're going to start using authentic materials, so you're going to profit from your level of English now. And last but not least, and this is actually the topic of my presentation, is the necessity to expand and enrich the vocabulary. And this is actually one of the key aspects of the whole process of proceeding from B2 to C1. And this is what I'm going to talk about for the next half an hour. There is a wonderful book by Mike McCarthy and John O'Keefe, which is called From Corpus to Classroom. And these very authoritative authors set some aims of an advanced program. And I go briefly through them now. After that, I'm going to comment on how you can incorporate these aims and how you can achieve these aims in your course of CAE preparation. So, first of all, the first task is to expose learners to a range of vocabulary at frequency levels beyond the first 5,000 to 6,000 word band, but which is not too rare or obscure. It means that when you are at B2 level, the estimate is that you acquire around 6,000 word families. But in order to move on to C1, you need to acquire at least around 2,000 more word families. And so your vocabulary range should be at around 8,000 to 9,000 words. And when you move on to C2, to the proficiency level, it should be from 10,000 to 12,000. Which is, when you think about it, is a huge amount of vocabulary. So in some cases, you need to double your vocabulary size, which is quite daunting task, I would say. The second aim is to bridge the gap between receptive and productive competence, which is very often called active or passive. So there are several terms that describe the same phenomenon. I'm also going to talk about it and suggest some activities on how you can bridge this gap. The next thing is you need to focus on specific lexical and affective meaning, connotations, register, etc. And you also need to develop the depth of lexical knowledge and collocational competence. I'm also going to talk about what it is and how you can develop it. So the idea is that you not only learn new vocabulary items, but you also learn more about the vocabulary that you already seem to know. And this is also a very important task, that you learn new collocations, new contexts, new examples, and new meanings of the words that seem quite familiar. And finally, we need to train awareness skills and strategies that will help the learners to become independent vocabulary learners and users. And this is mainly related to the use of dictionaries, of corpora, of thesaurus, so all kinds of resources that provide you with some information about vocabulary. So I'm going to go through 4 of these aspects, and I'm going to talk a bit about theory, and then I'm going to provide you with some practical activities that you can do in your advanced preparation course. So let's go on. First of all, to expose learners to a range of vocabulary at frequency levels beyond the first 5,000 to 6,000 word band. And there are 2 important things that you need to know. 2 types of reading, extensive reading and intensive reading. And just type in yes if you know what is extensive reading and intensive reading. I don't ask you for definitions, just type yes or no. Yeah, so this is actually, these terms I think are quite familiar to those, for example, who passed TKT or just basic methodological course. I'm going to explain it, don't worry. So extensive reading is basically when you read for pleasure, when you read for yourself. And in the case of B2 plus C1 level, it could be unabridged, so not graded, unabridged fiction, reading at appropriate level. The rule of thumb is that you need to have no more than 10% of unknown words. Sometimes some scholars say even there should be 5% of unknown words. So really a very, very small amount of unknown words. And the idea is that you develop the fluency in reading. This is basically the same task as you have with graded readers at lower levels. Yeah? So the graded reader should be up to the level of the student, so that the student reads for pleasure and doesn't focus much on the unknown words, or these unknown words don't prevent them from understanding the main idea or the plot. And the question is how to find these sources, and I think this is a very individual thing, because I would definitely not recommend you to start with classic 19th century literature, classic novels. I would rather opt for something modern and some easy reads, like maybe detectives, modern short stories, modern novels, and the easiest way of finding out whether this particular book is suitable for you or not is just to open the first page and to try to read the first paragraphs and realize if you can easily follow. So, and if you are interested in reading this book, so that's perfectly okay. And I try to avoid to give any recommendations because the tastes really vary, and so some people have different tastes in literature. Then that was about fiction. Then all sorts of non-fiction, and here we mean first of all newspapers or websites of newspapers. I personally am a huge fan of The Guardian. They have a totally free website and a free app for your phone and tablet, and you can find all kinds of all kinds of articles, stories, news, and agony answer. For example, people write their life stories and they ask for some advice from a psychologist or just an ordinary person. And this is also an excellent source of authentic vocabulary that you may read and increase your reading fluency. Finally, authentic podcasts or just radio. Is there some problems with the sound again? Okay. On the maximum. No problem. Okay, no problem. So I continue. Good. Sorry, I'm just recovering from the flu, so I'm going to cough. Okay, it's authentic podcast. What I mean by authentic is podcasts that are not made to learners. So there are plenty of podcasts for learners, but at this stage, we have to seek podcasts that are made for native speakers. BBC Radio 4 is traditionally an excellent source of different podcasts, plenty of topics, history, culture, music, cinema, whatever. Okay. Now, can you hear me now? Okay, better. I honestly don't know what's going on. I don't touch anything, but it's just tricky. It's really strange. Anyway, so I see that my microphone is showing, some sound, so I hope it's gonna be okay. Okay, BBC Radio 4. Plenty of excellent quality podcasts. And this extensive reading and listening, the idea is that you do that every day on an everyday basis, and this is outside of the classroom activities for pleasure. So make sure that you follow your own interests and you listen and read for your own pleasure. Then intensive reading is a slightly different thing, and this is where we read carefully, we read with some attention, and we work with the language that we read. And sources for intensive reading could be course book texts, past exam papers, or again, any kind of authentic materials like newspapers, articles, blog entries, agony answers, and so on. And here, explicit language focus and strategy training is really important. And I'm going to show you some ways of working with it. So this is a fragment of a course book ready for CAE, which I hope you know quite well. And so this is a reading text. As you see, there are some words in bold, highlighted. And while you are, or your students, you are reading, so during the task, you can work with your students on trying to work out the meaning from context. So I was listening to a presentation of Steve an hour ago, and he also talked about this strategy, and many scholars agree that this is one of the most useful strategies, learner strategies, to be able to work out meaning from context. And for example, in this text, so these words are really highlighted, and it's quite easy to understand what these words might mean. Of course, your students should guess exactly, but you can either decide that this is positive or negative, or so at least at this level. And post task. So when you finish reading, when you do the task that you have in your course book, you need to you can explicitly teach some selected. Okay, again, the sound Just drives me crazy. Okay, how is it now? Let's check. I did this sound to max and just okay, everything's right. Okay, continue. Explicit teaching of selected vocabulary items. How can you do that? This is an example. So you saw the word impeccable here in the text. This is the second word in bold that you can see. And you look up this word in a dictionary. And here is this abstract from a Macmillan dictionary. And this is a very short definition. Perfect in any way. Yeah. And there are two collocations. Yeah? Impeccable behavior. The standards of service are impeccable. And back to the text, you had impeccable manners. Yeah. So you can ask your students, what can be impeccable? And you can elicit manners, behavior, standards of service, or language, for example. And give an example. Yeah? Your written English is impeccable. Maybe you have a student who has really impeccable English. Why not praise them? And then you try to personalize it a bit. So try to give your students an anchor so that they have some association to remember this word. Ask your students, have you met a foreigner who spoke impeccable Russian? Or, when was the last time you experienced impeccable service? And this kind of discussion, these questions will lead to a discussion that helps your students to memorize this word, at least at these initial stages. All right, let's move on. The second aspect of vocabulary teaching, to bridge the gap between receptive and productive knowledge, competence. And here I always talk about noticing strategy. And Professor Richard Schmidt, who worked at Hawaii University, was the author and researcher of this noticing strategy. And I put a quotation here by him. People learn about the things they attend to and do not learn much about the things they do not attend to. Sounds very obvious, sounds like a Captain Obvious, but indeed it rings true, right? So I think that most of you will agree with that. And how can we make these things, the language, noticeable? There is a very quick theory observation about noticing hypothesis, and there are two terms, input and intake. So these terms are from the theory of second language acquisition. So input is everything a learner hears or reads. And when you have a big amount of input, it doesn't mean that you understand everything or that you pay attention to everything. What usually happens is when a person sees some unfamiliar word, or phrase, or idiom, they just don't pay attention to that. So usually they can understand the meaning, but they don't pay attention to that. And the intake is the part of the input that learners notice. And our task as a teacher, or a task of a learner as a strategy of a learner, is to make input become intake. How can this be achieved? For example, you can take the text you worked on and you can gap the words you want to concentrate on. Here I give you an example of the same text I showed you some minutes ago, and I gapped the words that were in bold. So, for example, I decided that I want to concentrate on these words, and you can also do it in two ways. So you can gap the words completely, as I did in the first case, or you can gap the whole word except for the first letter. So the first letter may give your students a slight idea of what was this word like. Yeah? And this is a nice revision activity. And it lets your students revise it and remember and think about the words that you talked about last time. And if you personalize that in the previous lesson, for example, with impeccable, as I gave you also an example, you can easily recognize this word. Your students can easily recognize this word. All right. Then another way of developing noticing strategy among your students is to work with audio scripts, and I love working with audio scripts. And usually you concentrate on the scripts after the main stages of your listening lesson. In a usual case, it would be a gist task, a task for general understanding, and the second one would be a specific information task. And after that, you can work with scripts. And the same idea of gapping different parts of the script, and you can gap meaning words, prepositions and phrases, and word parts. And the reason why I love audio scripts a bit more than reading text, for example, is because there are a lot of areas that you can concentrate on. Because audio scripts usually contain more idioms, more colloquial phrases, more phrasal verbs. It's rather a rare case that you have a lot of phrasal verbs in a reading text. But in listening text, you can find plenty of those things. And you see, so there's again a piece of a script from Radio 4 CAE, and this is what I did with it. For example, I typed in the text that you see here, right? This is the same text. And I decided to focus on prepositions. Yeah, so I deleted the prepositions and I gave my students this text and asked them to fill in the gaps without any options. Yeah. So let's do the first 2 or 3. Yeah. So, hi, I'm Simon, and last week I got to spend a whole day at the National Museum. What is the preposition? At the National Museum, where I was shown around one of the curators. Okay, by. Well done. By, and this is the agent in a passive structure. And so on and so forth. Yeah, so these things help your students think and analyze the language more. Yeah, so this second example is a great moment where you can very briefly revise passive. Yeah, I was shown around what grammatical structure is. It's passive. And by one of the curators. Who is the curator? Curator is the agent. Okay. Then a different approach. For example, I would like to concentrate on phrasal verbs and tenses, or tenses. And again, this can be very helpful for revising and preparing for the use of English part, because in EGA we have this tenses task in the first part, and in C and FC we have also open-close tasks. And again, so here I removed the particles of the phrasal verbs. So for example, hi, I'm Simon, and last week I got spent a whole day at the National Museum. What is the preposition? I got to spend. Well done. And where I was shown by one of the curators. What is the particle? Around. Okay. So I think you got the idea. And yeah, so what I like about it is that you can choose what you can concentrate on, and the scripts are always there for you to experiment, to concentrate on different aspects. Right. we move on, and so this is an example procedure of a listening lesson. Yeah, so this is a summary of what I was showing to you. Yeah, so if it's a typical listening lesson, so you lead in with visuals and questions, then you give a gist task, then specific information, then you study the script, and you decide what things you highlight. So you first highlight it before you test it during the next lesson. You highlight interesting fixed phrases, collocations, idioms, phrasal verbs. Ask students to work out the meaning from context, or do a matching exercise, item plus meaning. Sometimes you can find these tasks in the course books, sometimes you can compose them themselves. Then you explain the item, give examples, provide translation if necessary. Don't be afraid of providing translation even at advanced level. Why not, if it saves you time? Then personalize, ask questions related to language item, as we did with impeccable. And next lesson, you give your students the same script with gapped items you focused on at the previous lesson. And optionally, you may create a Quizlet set with the same gapped sentences and ask your students to revise it. Okay, let's move on. Another thing, scaffolding. Scaffolding in speaking also helps you to bridge the gap between receptive and productive knowledge. And so this is again a sample from a course book and ready for CAE. And this is useful language for a speaking activity, which is describing and comparing, contrasting the pictures. And CAE, there's also such kind of task. What can you do? So first of all, again, you do what your course book asks you to do. You categorize the words given in the task. And you discuss what words can be used to describe what picture. Yeah, so you have a set of pictures there, and you can immediately discuss, okay, this word is suitable to this picture, and so on. Then what I like to do, I expand a bit the vocabulary given. Sometimes I try to elicit it from students or prepare some words to teach. So for example, here you had thrilled and elated, yeah? And so you give thrilled and elated, and then you can expand it a bit to excited, which would be mostly familiar to CAE candidates, and expand it to exhilarated. Exhilarated can be unknown for your students, so why not expand it a bit more? You can discuss at this stage the difference in meaning and usage, and after that, you ask your students to provide some individual sentences, paying attention to the structure of speculation and target vocabulary. And again, here in this page, so you see in the yellow box, you see examples of language of speculation, which is also really necessary to complete the task successfully. And to ease your students' way into the task, you exemplify, you model one or two sentences yourself. For example, the woman in the picture must be thrilled and exhausted at the same time because she'd given birth to twins. And you use the target vocabulary here, thrilled and exhausted. Ask your students to do the same. Don't ask them to do the whole task yet. Yeah, so just some separate examples, sentences. And after that, you do the full task, comparing and contrasting the pictures. Scaffolding means that when a building is constructed, this woodwork that is put to ease the construction workers to build around. So this is scaffolding, and this is what you do in your teaching. So you build this woodwork for your students to ease their way into the task and to activate the vocabulary and that they need to use in this particular task. All right, move on. Developing the depth of lexical knowledge and collocational competence. And again, this task should be definitely familiar to you. This is a multiple choice task. Also present in FC, C, CP, UG, right? And again, how can you approach the task and expand it a little bit? So you can lead a discussion about synonyms, and you can show how complete synonyms are almost impossible. Examples: big, large, high, or tall. And then, if you do it in a group, you can assign a set of 4 words from each task to each peer in the classroom. In pairs, so provide your students with dictionaries. It can be computer dictionaries, online dictionaries, paper dictionaries, just what you have, or thesaurus, and ask peers to research the words and to work out the differences in meaning of such a set. Yeah? So, for example, switch, alter, vary, adjust. Yeah? Then peers report back, ask them if there were any problems or disagreements. And when you do the actual task, when you do the fill in the gaps, ask your student to explain what word fits in the gap and why others don't fit. Why is this important? Because, okay, so they might either guess or they might know the word that they put into the gap, or they might know the other 3 words, but they don't know the 4th word, so they eliminate. And finally, they may guess, more or less guess, the right answer. But if next time they see the same stretch of words, they might not know the differences, so they didn't learn anything about it, and so this time they might not guess. They might be not so successful at guessing. So it's a long and hard way. It's a quite meticulous way of doing it, but I think this is the only way of developing this collocational competence and the differences between synonyms. As an optional and final task, you can create a wiki page on, for example, padlet.com or Google Docs or elsewhere. You can create a wiki page where you put all these sets of 4 words with examples, with collocations, with differences in meaning, and you create a kind of classroom project with your students, and it can develop in quite interesting things. All right. Then, personalization. I already mentioned a bit, of course, personalization before, but that's, again, how you can expand a little bit a task of collocations, fill in the gaps task. So, again, first you do what your course book asks you to do. You fill in the gaps with tasks. So the first one, the film Star Wars was an overnight success. And then you ask questions, your students. Think about the film that has made an overnight success recently. Why was it so successful? Then you have another collocation, burning ambition, the second one. Yeah? You can ask your students, what is your burning ambition? How can you make it come true? The next one, you have increasing motivation. Ask your students, what is your recipe for increasing motivation when you don't want to study anymore? Probably some of your students will have some nice pieces of advice. And ask your students to write the sentences at home, to revise and to remember these contexts better. This personalization helps learners to remember the collocations better and to make the language their own. It eases their way into using them in speaking and in writing. Okay, and the final thing I wanted to show you is working with a corpus. First of all, do you know what is a corpus? And are you familiar with British National Corpus? Type yes or no. No. Okay. Corpus is a huge collection of different pieces of language. So, for example, in a huge corpus, you can find all sorts of newspaper articles, spoken language, fiction literature, whatever, yeah, you name it. And corpus is a collection of millions or sometimes even billions of language samples. And the whole this language, it is tagged, so it means that you can search in this corpus. And many modern course books are corpus based, so you can look at the back of the books and see the signs of that corpus was used in creating this course book. It means that the authors worked with authentic samples of language and samples of language that are from real use, so they were taken from real life. It was not the fantasy of the course book authors, but this is a real language use. And British National Corpus is one of the biggest, and it is free to use, even though it requires you to register there, and sometimes it shows you some advertisements, but basically it's a free and accessible tool to research. I'm going to show you some things you can do with the corpus. So you go to this page and you have this, you can type in a word. For example, you want to see what are the biggest, what are the most frequent collocates of the word dangerous. So you type in dangerous, you click on collocates, and then you click on find collocates, and okay, and this is what you get. You get a list of words that are often collocated with dangerous. And this, you see the percentage on the right, in the right column. And so, for example, you see that potentially dangerous is a very, very frequent collocation. So 6%, it's quite a high figure. And then you see dangerous driving. Sometimes something is highly dangerous. What is good about corpus is that corpus provides you with more collocations than a dictionary, and you also can see the frequency. Yeah, so you see the percentage, how really often it is used together. Quite a valuable information. The second thing you can do with corpus, you want to check if this or that collocation exists. Again, dictionaries not always provide you with the full information, and what I often do with my students' writing, when I check somebody's writing and when I see a strange collocation which I'm not very familiar with, and I'm not sure whether you can say that or not, I go to the corpus and I type in these two words and check whether these collocations exist in corpus. If they exist, it's okay. If they don't exist in the corpus, so that's probably it doesn't exist anywhere in life. I warn you not to use Google or the internet for that reason, because on the internet there are plenty of all sorts of language, correct, incorrect, by native speakers, non-native speakers, whatever. So Google is very unreliable in this sense, but British National Corpus is a very authoritative thing. So, humble opinion. So I think almost all of you are quite sure that this exists, this collocation exists. So I type it in, I click on find collocates, and this is what I get. And these are the examples from the corpus. And what's more, I can read the examples, and I can also get the information about the genre, the context. So if you look at the third column from left, so the first is 1, 2, 3, then there's some acronyms you don't use, but then you see W fict prose, fiction prose, then non-academic humanities arts, essay school. Yeah, so this gives you information about the register and the context of use. Yeah, and this is also quite valuable information. Yeah, and so you see what kind of examples could it be, and you can take some examples into your teaching preparation, or you can write it down for your own need, and so on. Tatiana, no, they don't have an app. It's a non-commercial source, and you only can use the website. And there are several universities who provide you with the access to this corpus. And this is quite a valuable thing, but this is not commercial, so only the website. The final thing I want to show you with the corpus, for example, you have a low frequency word, advanced level word, garrulous. And again, I want to know, is it a frequent word or not very frequent word? And again, in what context is it used? Because again, what you usually get in the dictionary is the definition and maybe one or two examples if it's a not very popular word, not very frequent word. So I type in garrulous, and what I can do. Frequency 38. For a billion word corpus is not much. Okay, but anyway, I want to know more about this word. So I click on the context, and then I can see who can be garrulous. A garrulous guide, garrulous and argumentative children, blah, 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 a garrulous woman, and so on and so forth. So that can give me plenty of contexts and examples and collocates. And what's interesting, if you look at the left-hand side, it's all fiction prose. So it means that this word is rather written, and it's probably better to use it in an essay, and it's not so frequent in speech. It doesn't mean that you can't use it in speech, but it's quite a literary word. Okay, so this is it, and this is what I wanted to show you with the corpus. I think it's a fantastic resource, and it's free, and you can use it in a variety of ways. So I think that I go on to the summary, and let's go briefly through the main points of my presentation. Read and listen extensively for pleasure. Try to expose yourself to rich and varied language input. Read different things. Noticing strategy. Pay attention to target language. Try to reproduce it in gap activities. Personalize the language. Try to use target language in meaningful and relevant context. Develop your vocabulary width and depth. Learn new vocabulary, learn new words, but also learn more about the words you know. And aim at becoming independent vocabulary learner. Use dictionaries, thesaurus, use corpus. They are all very, very valuable resources providing you with plenty of necessary information. And these are the sources I used for my presentation. Some of them are academic, well, all of them are academic articles. Some of them you can find online. Some of them are books. All the examples from a course book I used in my presentation are from Ready for CAE Macmillan, a great book for your CAE preparation. And I thank you very much for your attention. I hope that the problems with sound didn't spoil your impression. And if you would like to get slides from my presentation, go on my VK page, vk.com, Paulina English, and I'm going to upload the PDFs with my presentation there. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paulina. Are there any questions? So feel free to ask Paulina. So Paulina, thank you very much for sharing such useful resources and practical tips. Yeah, it's been great as usual. Thank you for your time. Yeah, lots of thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anna is asking how she can get slides. So Paulina has said, go to her page. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So only thanks. So thank you very much, Paulina. So this is it. So we're officially closing. And I think it's time for you to upload your certificates.